Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 11 of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Roy Snell at Tom Fox. This podcast was taped live at the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics 15th Annual Compliance and Ethics Institute, which was recently concluded in Chicago. In this podcast, Roy and I have a chance to interact with a live audience and bounce from topic to topic. We discuss in this episode the breadth and depth of wisdom from the General Session speakers this year, what Bill Baer, the Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General from the Department of Justice, suggests to you to keep the Department of Justice from out of your hair, the pervasiveness of modern slavery and human trafficking. So we ask how many slaves you think there are in the U.S. right now, and the number will surprise you. Move on to Kristy Grant-Hart's and her infectious passion for compliance. We talk about what it means to attend the Compliance and Ethics Institute and be with your people, compliance people. We talk about the difference between being older than soil and older than dirt. I expound upon why we can't give Roy ink pens that make any noise, and we take an in-depth look into the Wells Fargo scandal. The episode comes in at just under 25 minutes. This is part one. Part two will be released next week. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unfair and Unbalanced. Hello, everyone. This is the inaugural live podcast of Unfair and Unbalanced, a podcast with Roy Snell and Tom Fox. We are thrilled you are here today to watch us record. We've got live tweeting going, but with the size of the crowd, I'm sure we'll have a few hecklers throwing questions up. So if you throw it up, I'll repeat it unless Courtney can get in front of you for the mic. So with that, welcome, Roy. Here we are at the 2016 Compliance and Ethics Institute. What have been some of your thoughts so far?
I've enjoyed it. We've had a good turnout. Matter of fact, it was big enough that we had a little trouble with space, but the staff did a great job sorting it out. And we had some. I think this is one of our most interesting years for general session speakers because we typically try to have a lot of diversity of general session speakers, and sometimes we don't have enough of what I would consider stone cold veteran compliance types or ethics types. And this year it was really, we leaned the other way. We had a lot of people who had a lot of great practical advice, and maybe the most interesting was Francesca, who has studied ethics via data as opposed to opinion. And she took a soft, vague science and made some sense out of it from a numerical standpoint or analysis, survey, data analysis, these sorts of things. And so I think we've had some fun. It's so far so good.
Well, today on day two, we had three keynotes that I found really interesting, very different yet very applicable to what we do. So the first one we had Bill Baer from the Department of Justice, and he gave the DOJ's standard, we went after the banks, we prosecuted the banks, we will prosecute, and I'm just sitting there going, oh my God. And then he flipped to something completely different, which some people in this room, I think, perked up on as well, which was, here's what you have to do to get cooperation credit. And he went through the steps. And but when he started, he said, but wait a minute, before we even get to cooperation credit, you got to fulfill the obligations of the Yates memo. And that means you have to turn over facts on individuals. He said, that is it. That is now how you get in to get cooperation credit. And then he listed the steps for cooperation credit. And within 5 minutes of his talk ending, the full text, full remarks of his speech were online at the DOJ site for speeches. So I'm going to pull that down, but if anybody's interested. And so really good information on the end there. The second keynote, Bill Johnson and Gwen Hassan talked about human trafficking and modern slavery. And Bill gave the same talk at the Utilities and Energy Conference in Houston. And I observed the same effect the second time I heard it. The room went dead silent. This was not, typically, I think when all of us think of modern slavery and trafficking, we think of the movie Taken, we think of the sex slave trade, and certainly that's a part of it. But there's a huge part. He gave a figure of 500,000 essentially modern-day slaves in America, people who were over here fitting the conditions of slavery working. He talked about 5 within miles of, he and Gwen talked about 5 within miles of O'Hare Airport. Very powerful talk. And how compliance fits into this, they're relatively new laws, and the government is forcing corporations to deal with the problem, and the answer is going to be compliance. But he did say that lots of companies are certifying that they are in compliance with the law, and they've committed a felony right out of the box. And then he had another interesting point, which was, this law is so new, it's not going to get a lot of play kind of within the Justice Department. I mean, you're going to get a junior lawyer. And that junior lawyer is going to be a very smart person, but they may probably have never worked in industry. And so when you come in, you've signed a certification that you're in complete compliance with federal law and you've not committed a felony, that's your starting point. And you have to have evidence of some type of compliance. So I found it interesting when they described the problem, the solution, and unfortunately I don't think most companies have really thought through that solution part, so that's something we can need. And then Kristy Grant-Hart. Mm-hmm. What a talk. I thought I was passionate about compliance. And, she is so passionate, and she wrote a book, How to Be a Wildly Effective Compliance Officer. And she took that passion and walked us through her steps to become a wildly effective compliance officer, and how you do with the negative Nellies, deal with the negative Nellies in your corporation. So great talk. She gave specific steps, communicating her passion and enthusiasm. Just a fabulous keynote to end the keynotes of day 2. So a great start to day 2, a great crowd. It's been an incredibly positive experience. I've forgotten what it's like to be with my people, in one room. It's really cool.
I did talk about that on the first day, that I think people don't understand the concept of some of these conferences, whether it's ours or somebody else's. These people work in environments where people don't really understand what they do. Some, certainly in their department, understand, but other departments, and it can be a little frustrating on occasion. And you go from this environment of where you work, where maybe 10% of the people truly to the core get what a compliance program is and a compliance officer does, to here where there isn't a person in the room that doesn't understand what you do. And there's a really huge need for people in this profession to have people understand what they're doing, because we're back home some days fighting for things that just a lot of people are not for, and you just, am I right? Should I be doing this? And you come here and you can check. Sometimes you might find out your peers think you've gone too far, or they say, no, you're on the right course, you've got to get it done. One other comment about the human trafficking. This is a funny story I shouldn't admit, but I was all against doing any human trafficking presentations at utilities or any other conference, and Adam's been after it. Adam Turtletop, one of our staff, the VP of everything not nailed down, is what I call.
We didn't give you this kind of pin so you wouldn't play. Put that back, put that over there. Don't play with the pin.
I'll hide that part. So
is he always like this?
Yes. Well, I actually brought a Red Bull, so I'd be a little more interesting. I'm usually pretty laid back about all this. So Adam keeps coming at us at these meetings about, we got to have human trafficking. I said, dude, this doesn't apply to a lot of people, and I stepped out of the way, and Adam got these folks on the agenda at utilities and now here. And it's one of the beautiful things about our system. We, like you and I, have a lot of banter back and forth, agree and disagree and that sort of thing, but we try not to have a totalitarian system where people get to try out their ideas. Also, Kristy, here's an odd comment about that. We've been flailing away at this for 20 years. And we have some people who've been around since dirt, a little long in the tooth, and
Soil, not dirt.
yes, it's true. I taught Tom that you don't call dirt soil or soil dirt. But
No, it really is like this all the time. This is not the show.
so here we are buzzing along, and a lot of the same people, and hearing from some of the folks who've been around for a long time again. And then out of nowhere comes somebody like Kristy, who over the last 5 years have gone from relative anonymity to someone that the industry all knows and respects, and fills a really important role that really not a lot of us did. We've all been rah-rah, stick with it, this is a great profession, but she is off the chain. She is helping a lot of people.
Well, now let's turn to some current events. So every year I say things can't get any better or any worse. So in 2012, we had Walmart. In 2013, we had GSK in China. In 2014, we started with Petrobras. In 2015, in the spring, we had FIFA. 2015, in the fall, we had Volkswagen. Here we are for the 2016 conference, and what lays down in our lap last week, but Wells Fargo. And then 2 days later, Yahoo. So they'll probably be studying well. First of all, I hope no one in the room from Wells Fargo. If you are, don't raise your hand, because we're going to talk about Wells Fargo. So, but what were some of your initial thoughts about Wells Fargo?
Well, I did the first cautionary tale thing, and as an organization, we have been very careful not to go too far down the road analyzing something that we don't have all the data. We have some very solid information on what happened. Wells Fargo, like BW, has shared some very clear facts about the number of people who have been released, the number of times the thing happened. And actually part of it is already, in a way, settled. But I think the thing we always...
Small part.
Yeah, the more to come.
More to come.
I think that there's always some more that we don't know, but the thing I'd like to say, even with all that caution I just laid out on the table, is how does it go on this long? How does something happen reportedly over 1 million times? And by the way, these are problems. I hear all this time, and the defense attorneys, these the regs are vague, the government's overreaching. There's too many regs, they're complicated. This is another story where a fifth grader could tell you that what was going on was wrong. And what I just think that the lesson that I'm going to wait till more information is in, but the lesson that I think we got to take from this, which is usually my peculiar view of things, is that does the compliance officer have independence, responsibility, and authority? Do they cover all risk areas? And are they allowed to use all the elements of a compliance program? If you have any kind of authority, if you have all risk areas, you could go anywhere and do anything, and use all elements of a compliance program, how do you not find out that this is happening and stop it somewhere around the 250,000th time? This is the piece that I would love to go there and empathetically say, I know I don't know everything, but could you explain to me how this wasn't caught and then attacked? And a big part of compliance is coming in after you find the problem. Education, controls, follow-up audits, is it still happening? How is any of that happening if they were discovering it all along, which is what I heard was happening?
So the thing that struck me, one of the things that struck me about Wells Fargo was, I've heard you talk about the evolution and development of the compliance profession, specifically utilizing the financial fraud around Enron, WorldCom, other cases. Where was compliance? Why wasn't compliance in the room? Didn't anybody have the ability or resources or authority within the corporation to stand up and say we should stop this? It seems that it's a further evolution of the risk, reputational risk now, that something as minor as these $2 million fake accounts or fraudulent accounts generated $400,000 for Wells Fargo.
Return on investment was very poor.
$240 billion corporation, $400,000 over 7 years. So extraordinarily minuscule money that they generated from these fraudulent accounts. And the second thing is that something as what I think is absolutely benign as a financial services product could become such a high risk if taken to an unreasonable extreme. So what is risk? Well, everything is involved in risk. If you're selling a bank card, that could be risk.
Yeah.
And that there needs to be some visibility into this.
Yeah.
So does that really play into kind of how you've seen the profession evolve?
Well, yeah, it's fascinating. It's happened for 20 years. I mean, the first stupid thing I ever said in compliance is I told somebody, a woman named Kathy Berner came to me, and I was a compliance officer in a healthcare system, and I said, it's all about billing. We're going to focus on billing. That's the biggest risk area. That's what we're going to focus on. And she said, you should focus on all risk areas. And I told her she was wrong, that you have to go after where the big problems are. And then about 2 years later, hopefully sooner than that, I smacked myself in the forehead and said, she's absolutely right. Since then, I've watched industry after industry say, well, our biggest risk is this, so we're going to wrap our whole compliance program around this thing. And I've seen a few industries do this, and one of them, I don't know them well enough to be sure of this, but financial services investment advisors are so crazy focused on insider trading and regulated by law to focus on insider trading that I don't think they're looking down the hall at one of the biggest risk areas in the building. That's a risk area for every organization that has financials, which is like every organization, about accounting fraud. And so, one of the things that we need to do as a profession is to say that the compliance professional should have all the tools available to them, every element of a compliance program, and they should do all risk areas. I'm going to give you one more example. Back home in Minneapolis is a company named Target, which is one of the best companies in the country, in my opinion. They had a credit card problem, and they announced shortly thereafter a press release that they had hired, or were going to hire, a new chief information officer and a new compliance officer. And I thought, this is symbolic to me. Not a lot of other people would read into it, but why would you announce after a major IT failure the announcement of a new position in compliance too, or a new hire? And I think the bell goes off. I think this is how it happens. The leadership sits there and looks and says, and I know everybody thinks every CEO knows everything that's going on in their company and they're all guilty of covering it up. I don't believe that. I think the CEO sits in the room and says, we did what? We did it how many times? And they at some point turn and say to the compliance officer, where were you? You were supposed to prevent, find, and fix ethical and regulatory problems. That's what you told me. And the compliance officer slides over their job description and says, you have it burned in a limited number of risk areas. IT wasn't in my risk area. So I couldn't go in, I didn't have the authority. Well, it's in there now. That phrase should be burned into a plaque at our office at SCCE.
It's in there now?
It's in there now. Eventually, people can try and restrict the role of the compliance officer all they want, but every time there is a major failure in a risk area that they don't cover, leadership will say, isn't your system supposed to be to prevent, find, and fix things of this type? And yeah, but you didn't have it in my job description. And I've been trying to tell you, we should be able to go anywhere and do anything. It's in there now because I'm mad because we're in the press and it was for a lame reason. Like, if we understand Wells Fargo well enough to say this, that they didn't benefit much even from the fact that they were doing this silly thing. The compliance officer should have been able to go in there and rattle some cages.
So how does something like a benign product, like a financial service or a debit card, coupled with incentives become something so toxic?
Oh, don't get me started here. I'm going to get into all kinds of trouble. I actually got some feedback personally from someone who handled it pretty nicely about something I tweeted related to this, is that I'm pretty tired of people blaming others for their failures. And the easy one is everybody blames the leadership, but we all have to have incentives. I mean, I'm sorry. If it's not written, if it's not financial, you have to say to somebody, I'm going to pay you a salary, I'm going to pay you benefits, and in return, I want you to do some stuff. And if you don't do that stuff, I'm going to fire you. So we put it into numbers, and a few of the people decide, I'm going to cheat to get this accomplished. And then they pull out their violin and they say, oh, my family, I have to feed my family, I had no choice. And all the bleeding hearts, frankly, some of them in our profession, oh, those poor people, they had to feed their family, they had no choice. Yeah, you have a choice, you can quit. I'm sick and tired of giving excuses to anybody who said, yeah, I cheated, and I cheated because of them. And I'm pointing for those who, I guess we are. Normally we're not on video. I'm pointing at Jay. I'm cheating because of Jay. And I say, no, where's the personal accountability? I don't care if somebody pushed him too hard. You also are supposed to say, I don't care how hard I'm pushed, how hard I'm bullied, how many of my colleagues are doing this. That's wrong. I'm not going to do it. And if you give people an out, this is where the Red Bull just kicked in. If you give people an out, we're going to just have people, look, I can do this, because every time I do it, I'm just going to say, well, the man pushed me. And so the people in the public sentiment will be that I was innocent. No, there was 1,000 people who were under this financial incentive system. And X number of them chose to cheat to get the win and the money. And the X number, the rest of them said, over my dead body, this is not me. I'm either going to stay here at whatever success rate I have at selling or whatever it is, or I'm going to get fired, or I'll choose to leave if I think this is really a bad environment. We have to tell every individual that they are personally accountable for ethical behavior. If we continue to give this massive out in all the press, oh, the poor people were pressured into doing this because they have to feed their family and keep their job. I'm sorry. That is utter nonsense. And I'd use a different word if we weren't being recorded. I'm sorry, I'm really... Please, anybody got anything? We'll jump around.
Any questions at this point?
Yeah, sure.
So this is the first studio audience question ever for the podcast.
It better be a fair and balanced
I'm
question.
honored to be the first question here. But, I mean, I somewhat see Roy's point that we shouldn't let people off the hook by saying that they had no choice, except for the fact that a considerable majority of people on this planet really, they don't have a choice. It's just most of them don't live here. Most of them don't attend our conference. Most of them don't attend white-collar jobs or anything like that. And a lot of them, yeah, sure, you can exercise your ethical responsibilities and then you're still left with no job and no way to feed your kids. Sounds good in principle until the kid actually starts crying because he's hungry. I think we also need to remember, for a lot of people, that is a very real reality. Not necessarily in this country, in the United States, but in the developing world, right. That is part of it. And the other thing, and then I'll be quiet, is that I think if you are going to exercise your ethical responsibility, which again, you should, it only makes sense to do that if that is rewarded, and if it gets punished, then there are too many companies where if you speak up and say this is wrong, they do say you're fired. And getting fired sucks. We need to break away from that. If they allow a speak up culture and says, this stinks, I'm not going to do it, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet.
So this is why I love doing these podcasts with Tom, because if I say something wrong or unclear, Tom helps clarify it. That's why these been a lot of fun, and I think you've helped clarify it. I'm speaking only about the United States.
Okay.
I know enough about other countries to completely agree with you, but I don't know enough to really opine about it. I'm just saying, in this country, there are enough jobs. People have got to stand up for what's right and stop blaming other people for their behavior. I think it's true for the C-suite as much as it's true for the people in the trenches who are telling everybody, in my opinion, incorrectly, that I got an incentive, so it's an implication that I should lie, cheat, and steal. And I think they should refuse to do it.
And I keep going back to this as just as benign a product as a debit card, and that pricing and that compensation structure and that compensation incentives given to employees led to this huge problem for Wells Fargo.